Awesome. Hey, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are joining me from. I am so thrilled that you are. My name is Barton Seaver. I am a chef, author, husband, father, proud resident of the delicious, ragged, jagged coast of Maine, where I am joining you from today. And, well, hey, I see already joining us a number of old friends that join me in my typical Thursday session. So thanks to those of you joining again. And to those of you new to the Rouxbe family or just new to one of my sessions, hey, it's really great to meet you. Welcome to the Rouxbe family. And thanks for tuning in today. We're really excited to have you and really also excited to support you through your mission of learning more about all things culinary, whatever your direction is. So these office hours are a great way for us to all interact. I personally love them because I learned so much from the questions that you ask. And there is no topic that is off limits here, so whatever you'd like to talk about. I know that there's a huge contingent of Forks Over Knives students who have just started, so welcome to any of you who have just joined. And because of that, we also have Ken Rubin, Chief Culinary Officer for Rouxbe, who is far more expert than I on Forks Over Knives and plant-based cooking. I am basically a pescatarian, and seafood is my bent. I am the instructor for the seafood literacy course here on Rouxbe, as well as an author of many books on the topic. So with that, maybe I'll throw it over to Ken just to say hello, a brief hello. And we are in different locations and communicating in strange ways, but we hope it will work. And then I'll come back to me and I'll take a couple of these questions. And I'll also start off with something I like to do, which is to talk about something that I am grateful for. And I'll tell you why. So, Ken, off to you.
Hey, Barton. Hope you're doing well today. Really happy to join you with this live event, and really happy also to welcome our new Forks Over Knives students. So great to have this option for dialogue. And I'd love to hear what you're grateful for, Barton. I'd also love to hear how your spring garden is coming along there in Maine. I know that it's just the beginning of the season, but I'd love to hear what's going on in your small family farm. So we'll hear it from you just when we head back.
Hey, Ken, it's nice to be on with you. Thanks. So through Patrick, who is our intermediary, the technical whiz and genius and good friend, at Rouxbe, who is helping to facilitate all these. So Ken is reading me, Patrick is reading me Ken's questions, and you asked about the farm. Well, the farm is one of the things that I am grateful for. So today we've got peas breaking ground here, the garlic. I plant about 1,200 heads of garlic here on the farm, an acre of saltwater farm here on the coast of Maine. The garlic is doing very well. I have managed to relocate my gopher. Yes! I am at Caddyshack level of frustration with this thing, and it's been 3 years, 3 whole seasons that it has been my menace. So, hey, thanks for asking about that. So, back to the comment I made earlier about something I'm grateful for. Well, this is all rooted in the fact that food is love, and the act of cooking for someone is an act of love. It is an act of kindness, of generosity. And as we all know, the world needs more of that. And each of us need more of that. So from all of us at Rouxbe, hey, thanks for what you do to bring love into the world. But love is based on gratitude as well. So one of the things that I like to do when I start any meal is just take a moment of being present, mindfulness, just to say something that I am grateful for. Because you know what? Gratitude is the very best ingredient in any dish you will ever make, right? And if you're just happy about it and mindful and present there with what's in front of you, and, hey, that's love. And that extends into it. So I'm happy today. I'm grateful for sunny days here on the coast of Maine where I can take my little 8-month-old baby boy, Rosie, we call him, and introduce him to the world that's largely been off limits due to cold weather. So it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. Okay, so diving in, questions over there to the right of the screen. You will see the questions in that gray box. Any question that you particularly like, you can click that heart button to sort of vote it up to the top. And well, with that, let's dive in. So Ken and I are going to be trading off back and forth between some of these answers. And yeah, so first question from Marilyn G. Hey, thanks for joining us. Will we learn which spices and herbs complement each other and are recommended for each dish in terms of like, well, genre of dish, pasta or cooking lentils, or by traditional sort of cooking themed cuisine such as Italian, Indian, French, etc.? Absolutely. That is a fundamental part of sort of learning the flavoring and just in how to interpret ingredients and begin to have a sort of a strategy for flavors, because so much of plant-based cooking is layering of ingredients, right? That we are finding satiation and enjoyment and that real pronounced culinary sort of presence through those layering of flavors. And herbs, spices are certainly one of the very best ways to do this. Now, I know that a lot of that information is embedded throughout the course, such as dry roasting heads of cauliflower with a curry spice on it, etc. So it is certainly integrated throughout the entire course. And we are also working on sort of a list of herbs and spices and friendly families and pairings, partnerships. And we will be, I've been meaning to get that out for a couple of weeks now, but we will certainly be back in touch with you when we do have that. Hey, Marilyn, thank you so much and welcome. Thanks for joining us. All right, next question from David B. Hi, David. When a recipe calls for minced garlic, is it just as good to use a garlic press? Also, how do you feel about using pre-minced garlic that you buy in a jar? Well, David, I have some opinions about this. I do. So, especially I'm a garlic farmer, so I am particularly a connoisseur of this. So garlic is, as you know, it is a very potent ingredient. And the more we process it, the more potent it gets. And the reason for this is, well, the same reason with a lot of other ingredients, that once we rupture cell walls, whether through cutting, mincing, pressing, cooking, etc., what happens is we break open those cell walls, and the olfactory chemicals, the things that we smell and that we taste, are exposed to air, at which point the process of blooming those flavors happens. Also, the process of strengthening those flavors, but also of degrading those flavors, because as it gets exposed to oxygen, well, those oils change. The chemistry of them changes. So minced garlic is, well, let's start off at the top. There's a number of ways to use garlic. First, yes, you can just roast it whole cloves or whole heads, right? And then use that sliced in half as a flavoring. You can peel them into single individual cloves and use those if you're cooking a stock or, say, cooking a pot of beans, etc., where it's going to have a long, slow cooking process. And it will break down and sort of fall into mush, sort of become part of the sauce. You can also smash the garlic with the side of a knife, but leaving the clove relatively whole. This is common in Italian cuisines, where what you're really trying to do is more flavor the oil that you're starting with, rather than adding the garlic in as a component of the finished dish. So oftentimes that garlic might even be removed. And just by that quick smash, all you're doing is blooming its flavors and sort of opening it up to the oil so that it can extract the flavor. Minced garlic is my preferred method, minced or sliced. Same thing here for intents and purposes. You would use this when you are incorporating the garlic into the sauce or into the dish. Now, say if I'm starting with olive oil and sauteing minced garlic, some sliced almonds, and then throwing in some zucchini, sliced zucchini, just 1 or 2 minutes, some salt, tossing it together. There you go. The garlic stays in. It cooks just till it's sort of nutty, golden brown, right? Beautiful. So the advantage to this is when you mince or you slice, you have pieces that are all pretty much the same. So they're going to cook at the same rate. And you haven't, if you're using a sharp knife and you're slicing or mincing correctly, you're not damaging the garlic to such an extent that you begin to degrade the flavor or it gets too strong. Now, pressed garlic or really smashed garlic paste, that's when you really begin to get the full flavors of it. And my other issue with that is that you end up with different sized pieces, some of it a little stringy, and you also end up with the most robust flavor because you've basically made a puree out of it, right? You've smashed as many of those cell walls as you can, exposing as much of it to the air as you can. Not only that, you've also exposed all the moisture. And so I've found that cooking pressed garlic is a very, very, I wouldn't say risky, but it requires a lot of attention because it goes really quickly. Because all of that water is exposed, it evaporates very quickly, and pressed garlic can just go from sautéing to burned very, very quickly. Also, I don't particularly love the flavor. If you're doing a vinaigrette, something like that, I've seen them call for pressed garlic, and quite honestly, I find it too flavorful. Instead, smash that garlic, like I was saying in the Italian style, and then rub the inside of the bowl in which you're going to make the salad in. And in that way, you're sort of seasoning it with those garlic oils, infusing it with the aroma, but none of the texture or the unpleasant bitterness. And as far as the minced garlic that you buy in the jars at the store, which is packed in water, no. Just no. You know what? I understand the value of convenience, but that takes a beautiful, charismatic, elegant ingredient, and it basically presents it in its Mr. Hyde form, in its worst form. Dr. Jekyll Mustard. So I just don't like that. It is old. It is often rancid. It sits in the refrigerator. I would recommend against it. Very long answer. Sorry about that, but it is it's an ingredient that is so key to so many cuisines and so many things. So I hope that really helps. Thanks, David. All right, from Ron. Hey, Ron, nice to have you joining us. What do you like to cook for dinner when you're tired of cooking? Ron, it's like you've been eavesdropping on my conversations, because guess what? Yeah, I'm a little tired of cooking, as so many of us are. Because, anyway, but I am thankful and grateful to be able to put food on my family's table, because that is thriving in this world, is having a meal in front of you and knowing your next meal is coming, right? So I am grateful for this. What do I cook? In my family, we eat a lot of seafood. We eat seafood 4 to 7 nights a week in various forms. And the dish that I go to more often than not is a pint or 2 pints of cherry tomatoes. I've got this little broiler pan. This is a 14-inch Staub pan that I've got. You could use a 10-inch saute pan, etc. I get it nice and ripping hot. I throw in a lot of olive oil. I throw in some of those smashed garlic cloves. And I throw in 1 to 2 pints of cherry tomatoes, just as they are, washed straight out of the tin. And then I put a piece of frozen seafood right on top, some salt, and I throw the whole thing in here in my trusty toaster oven. There you go. Yeah, I do a lot of cooking of frozen seafood, and I do a lot of cooking in a toaster oven. And that's what I do when I'm tired of cooking. It's that. It's also that zucchini dish that I explained earlier. So again, olive oil, minced garlic, almonds, saute those till they're golden brown, add some zucchini in, sliced, salt right away so it draws out the moisture, and just toss it in the oil, and that moisture from the zucchini as it cooks down emulsifies with the olive oil, and you end up with this really delicious, wonderful sauce all in. And that whole meal, with some rice in the rice cooker, the rice takes the longest at 20 minutes, and the whole meal I can put together in 20 minutes with very little effort. So we eat that a lot around here. Also a lot of bagged frozen peas, bagged frozen corn. It's really good. It's really good as long as you season the water you're cooking it in with some salt. It's really good and really convenient, and it's deeply okay to serve your family frozen vegetables out of a bag. It is deeply okay. In fact, I recommend it wholeheartedly. Hey, Ron, thanks. I hope that you are not too fatigued yourself with cooking, because, well, It is fun. I hope you find joy in it. Take care. All right, from Catherine L. How do you judge how long to cook something you make from scratch? Just how long something you make from scratch will last in the fridge, as in homemade barbecue sauce or remoulade? Huh. Can you base it on how long the original ingredient would last, as mayonnaise for remoulade or tomato paste for the barbecue sauce? What a fascinating question. And one that I will offer a disclaimer on forthright, which is I can't tell you an exact time frame. Food science on that, it's going to depend on so many things, including when that ketchup was opened that you made your barbecue sauce out of, etc. How much time it sat on the counter when you were making it, etc. So many different things. My rule of thumb in my family is if it's still around on Sunday, I generally give things about a week. I'm getting better at making just what I need, but I'm also pretty vigilant about just putting stuff in the freezer right away. That if I make barbecue sauce, or I make romesco sauce very often, a puree of roasted tomatoes, peppers, onions, garlic, and almonds, it's hard to make a small batch of that. It's hard to make a small batch of barbecue sauce, right? I mean, you can, but just put it in little snack bags and throw it in the freezer. That's what I do, in portion size servings, so that you can just pull it out. In that way, you take the guesswork out of it. In the freezer, you're talking 6 months to a year, maybe. So you take a lot of the guesswork out of it, but also just in the fridge, I would say a week, unless you're dealing with super perishable ingredients like fresh herbs that were minced into it. Those are just going to lose their flavor and vivacity very quickly. So there you go. Hey, I hope that helps. And awesome that you're making all this stuff from scratch at home. Awesome, Catherine. Appreciate you. All right. Daniel A. Hi, friend. What are some of the difficulties novices in the kitchen have when going plant-based? Well, I'm going to throw this one to Ken, and I will say that I have one comment to add to that, which is that I found that a lot of people, when going to plant-based, it's difficulty in menu planning, and it's really around the nutrition aspect of it, trying to get the sort of the equation right as you move to a new diet. So, but Ken, if you could take this one, talk more about that. Thanks.
Sure. Well, thank you, Barton. I think it's a good setup in terms of, the planning that's required when people go through any sort of dietary change. But I always recommend for people, when you're trying to incorporate more plants into your diet, one of the biggest barriers that I see from people, aside from some of the obvious things like some limitations on knife cuts or some basic cooking skills, and that's a great reason to come to Rouxbe, is to help you with those things. But one of the big barriers I see is actually sort of individuals who have a narrative around vegetables, where it's a negative narrative, that they're used to eating vegetables, but they don't like them, or vegetarian eating means you're just eating salads and these sorts of things. So a lot of it is getting over that hump to really realize that you're not really limiting yourself. You're opening up this whole new world that is so interesting and so inclusive of lots and lots of new things. And it's just a new way of kind of looking at food. And once people get past that old narrative of, the overcooked broccoli, or the one vegetable they were forced to eat as a kid that they didn't like, or they don't like raw vegetables, or they don't like salad greens, and these sorts of things that become sort of a narrative that can limit people. Once they realize it's like sky's the limit, it really helps people understand, great, there's all kinds of things that if I put them in my mouth and I taste them, I'm going to really like them. So let's find the right mix of knife skills and the right recipe, the right complementary flavors, and in some cases, the right context, the right time to make those foods. If you're feeling really rushed, if you're feeling like you're super hungry, probably not the best time to take on some big cooking project, because guess what? You'll be agitated. You'll say this wasn't great because the whole time you're not in the right mindset. But if you, do some of those tricks that Barton shared earlier with those 20-minute, zucchini or tomato dishes, those sorts of things, and save maybe the longer, more elaborate dishes you're doing for the first time when you have an hour, that might also help. So for me, it's oftentimes just about giving people that pat on the back, that thumbs up, like you can do this. Don't be overwhelmed with all the different things you can do and all the steps. Start with, well, what do I want to eat? I like that food. How do I want to cook it? How do I want to serve it? Who am I going to share it with? And let that be, part of the frame of walking into that space versus, rehashing old narratives that probably don't even make a whole lot of sense. If you were eating canned Brussels sprouts or something, like, well, of course that's not going to taste good, but let's figure out a way to really bump the flavor, apply some cooking technique, and then also taste, right? Put it in your mouth and say, wow, I like that level of garlic. I like the effect of the heat from the chilies on that dish, or I like the softness of that dish. Let your mouth and your senses also help guide you. I think it's really important. Only you can really determine what you like, and it's important to know that, and that way you can have some control, some say over what you're cooking. So those are just some initial thoughts, Barton. I'd love to kind of get your take on some of those comments, especially kind of as it relates to kind of the context of cooking, knowing that you might not take on that big project when you got the cranky kid next to you, or you're super hungry and you don't have the time.
Ken, that's great. I appreciate that. So, yeah, one of the other things I would say is that you're still cooking. This is still dinner. I guess I'll talk more to sort of the culture of what you're sitting down to, and what the purpose of your time in the kitchen is. One of the things that I've seen people struggle with, and I struggle with ourselves here in my family, is that there are certain dishes that we savor in deeper ways than just the physical craving for, whether that's the Thanksgiving turkey, whether it's the bacon at brunch, whatever it is, the hamburgers grilled out. There are dishes that we imbue with a ritual significance, far more so than Tuesday night dinner necessarily. Giving up on those can sometimes feel like punishment in a way. And so I recommend to people who are going plant-based, like, if there are a couple of things that you just really love from a elemental standpoint, yeah, it's okay. It's okay to hold on to those, right? In that way, it sort of gives you freedom to enjoy more. I guess it sort of lowers your expectations a little bit of your explorations into a new form of eating. You're not trying to make up for your grandmother's tuna noodle casserole, which holds this place in your heart, because you're just never going to make up for that. So if there are those things that fill your heart with joy, just eat them. And if there's things on Tuesday night, well, you know what? Guess what? You're still just cooking. You're still sauteing. You're still just roasting. It's really the same things going forward. So just approach it with confidence, approach it with joy. And yeah. All right. So I hope that helps. That was a lot. And Ken, thank you for your answers. So we'll go on to Susan K here. Hi, Susan. Thanks for your question. Do chefs ever get inspired by other original recipes as they create their own? And at what point would the recipe be considered your own recipe? Here's the truth. There is nothing new in cooking, with very, very few exceptions, like, the people that are using class 5 lasers to do things. And Ferran Adria at El Bulli in his tenure there doing molecular gastronomy and stuff like that, using all sorts of chemicals. Other than that, if it's with food, it's been done. Even with fusion cuisines, it's been done. And should you be poaching kiwis in coriander scented bacon fat and serving them with lemon blossom honey? No, just no. Has someone done that? I'm sure they have. So is any, and this is an interesting cultural question you bring up, is any recipe ever really original? And the answer is no, because we as cooks, as chefs, we are both literally the product of our education, climbing the ladder, of all of those influences and examples that have been set, all the dishes that we learned our skills on. But we are, also culture. We are representing just the evolution of food itself. So is this pasta dish that I've come up with unique and interesting and different and new? Maybe, but only because I put my personal spin on it in my time, in my place, in my context of my menu, in my restaurant, with my surroundings, my service, the style of my menu, etc. That's what makes a linguine with clam sauce uniquely mine. So is it my recipe? Yes, it is my recipe, but it's really my presentation more than it's my recipe. And it's my interpretation more than it's my recipe. Now, technically, recipe is intellectual property. And so, yes, there are boundaries around that. From a cultural vantage point, I think those are two different discussions. And there's a lot of discussion around this in terms of cultural appropriation. And people who look like me, cisgender white males, have, always been sort of built this industry largely and have been at the head of it because we haven't given credit to or given opportunity to other people in other cultures, and fine dining reflects that. So there's a lot of reflection now happening around, who owns these recipes? Who owns these cultures? And who is appropriate to represent them and to interpret them? And that, I think, is incredibly healthy for cuisine, because bottom line is the creator is such a part of that, and the culture and the cuisine behind it is so important, of a fundamental underpinning of those flavors and just everything about it. So there's that aspect of it, the cultural aspect of it, how, where, why it's served, and who makes it. Also, then the recipe, the technical document. Now, the technical document, I've written 8 cookbooks. I own all of those recipes in there. If you were to take one of those recipes, Susan, and change the half tablespoon of salt that I called for and change it to 1/8 of a tablespoon of salt, it would now be your recipe. So that's how fluid that is. But by and large, the answer here is yes, look to your forebears, look to influences, borrow from them, borrow copiously from them, give them credit, respect the culture from which those flavors come from, reflect on that culture, and then make it your own in a respectful way. Hope that helps, but you opened up a big can of fried onions there. In terms of conversations that are happening. Ken, would you like to add anything to this? Because I know that you've been very active in conversations around this.
Oh, here I am. Absolutely. I love the way you framed about the responsibility that we have, people who are in the space, in terms of giving proper attribution and credit, and even point of inspiration for those things that might not have come more naturally or organically or came through travel and these sorts of things. One of the things I always find fascinating also about recipes is that, for most of human history, people didn't write this stuff down. It was passed down through oral tradition. It was something that was more of an embodied practice. It was very much based on what was available or what was expected and these sorts of things. It's only really been in the last few hundred years, and primarily in Western cultures and literate societies, where these recipes have been codified, written down in the way that we now see recipes, kind of a formula, right? You have a series of ingredient inputs, and then you have this kind of process or procedure or recipe narrative that follows that kind of tells you what to do with all those things. So Barton's absolutely correct. If you take his recipe and go from a half a tablespoon to a quarter tablespoon, that will change the formula. But the big thing in terms of recipe ownership or copyright is not so much the list of ingredients. So you technically can't copyright, 1 pound of salt, 2 gallons of water, and 10 lemons as a recipe, whatever that would make. What you can copyright, what you can own, is the narrative procedure of what you do with that, of how you describe the process and the steps, of what the elaboration is, how you interpret those things going together. And the choice of words there really matters. And that's the thing that when someone's developing a new chocolate chip recipe, in many cases, it's actually very close or even sometimes exactly the same formula in terms of how much flour, how much sugar, how much butter, eggs, whatever it might be in that type of formula. It's really the process and some other way of elaborating the steps along the way as you get there that makes that recipe unique. A way of mixing it that's a little bit different, a way of chilling it that's different, a way of portioning it or serving it that's a little bit different. But it's a really fascinating subject because, I agree with Barton. If you think about recipes just being food combinations, likely very, very few things that we can do now that would be novel, right? People have been putting together various foods out of creativity or necessity for a very long time. For me, it's really more about the story, the narrative, the language that we use to explain the process, because in that narrative and in those words, you get a lot more information about what's meaningful, what's important, what is valued along the way in that process. So those are just some additional thoughts and ramblings on the subject of recipes. But it's a great thing to do. Almost look at recipes from a historical point of view and look at how they've changed, not just from the ingredient perspective, but from that narrative perspective. It actually assumes a lot when you're giving people some instructions. So I'll pass back to you, Bart, but those are just some initial thoughts. Oh, I'm being told to take some new questions here. Question coming in from Terry Lynn. Question about FOK coursework. Says, how can I modify the FOK coursework to be cooking for just one person? Great. I am sensitive to reducing food waste. Shopping and cooking for just me is proving challenging. Yeah, it's really difficult, as you've discovered, to cook for one. Cooking for two or cooking for a small household is definitely a lot easier than cooking for one. A lot of the recipes in Forks Over Knives land, as you know, are great in that they really produce a very large amount of food. Oftentimes it's 4 to 6 pretty substantial portions. So leftovers, batch cooking, freezing before you have a chance for it to get to that week-long state in your fridge is going to be important. But I would say, just as a overall starting point, one good thing to do is just start reducing your recipes by half. It's not going to work exactly the same way with every recipe. Some recipes require a certain base volume to kind of have the cooking or the blending or the processing happen, kind of like when, Barton was referring to making a very, very small amount of barbecue sauce. If you were to make, a quarter cup of barbecue sauce, a very small amount of ingredients in there. But essentially what you'd want to think about doing is really reducing that recipe by about at least half. In many cases, it'll be somewhat easy, just half as much of the ingredients. So if you're doing a chopped cold salad, or you're making pickles, or doing some other thing, you can literally just use half. The other thing to think about is really planning around some of the production, so you can very strategically freeze small portions, pull them out later, so you can have really interesting salads or interesting things to add to a soup or a stew or a braise or as a snack. So a little bit of strategy, I would say, just to kind of make it so that you don't have that feeling of a burden of wasting food, but also knowing that there's a certain critical mass of cooking from a timing and a temperature and a heat transfer kind of perspective. That just becomes a little bit more difficult when you're working in smaller portions. Certainly something worth exploring and worth practicing. I love the sentiment around not wanting to do anything that's going to cause waste in your kitchen. So I think it goes back to some of those planning conversations, even having a neighbor or a friend or a coworker who might be interested or curious about some of those things, just to make that point even of sharing the food. So for me, cooking has never been just about feeding myself or just about the joy, the physical, emotional joy I get from cooking, but really that process of sharing is always key. So maybe consider building that into one of your steps. Next question coming in here. This is so great to have the opportunity to ask questions. Curious, reading and discovering that using plant-based oils in cooking is being discouraged. Can you explain a little more about this and how to convert recipes? So yeah, Anna, within the Forks Over Knives space and within some of the what we call whole food plant-based movement, there is definitely a lot of awareness around oils, and in particular, refined oils, not having a strong positive contribution to your diet. So this really comes from kind of two or maybe three lines of thought. Number one, within the whole food plant-based philosophy that Forks Over Knives subscribes to, they're really trying to limit consumption of any food that's not eaten in its whole form. So as an example, they would say, if you want to have fat from olives, eat olives. Don't press the olive, extract the oil, and just use that as a singular component of a dish. So part of it is the philosophical underpinnings around using whole foods versus processed foods and kind of gaining the full benefit of that food. In that case, the olive has nutrients and fiber and other things that wouldn't appear in the oil itself as a refined product that comes from the olive. The other thing around the aversion or kind of the sensitivity around use of oil within the Forks Over Knives community and similar whole food plant-based communities also comes down to just the realization that for many people, those oils do very little in terms of providing anything that's nutritionally supportive. It's oftentimes just fat, sometimes low quality, highly refined fat. And for people who are looking to go on a healthier path, oftentimes just removing that is really good from a reduction of calories perspective, recalibrating and retraining your palate to understand that there's lots of other great things out there in the world to eat that aren't so laden with fat or so oil rich, and just kind of going along those lines of saying, yeah, we're not going to give up fat, but we're going to give up the fat in that extracted form. So go and have your nuts and your seeds, even pastes and things made from seeds. So like tahini paste made from sesame seed, because it's just the ground whole seed, even though it does give off the oil, would be an appropriate food to still consume because it's not being separated out from the other components of that food. So those are part of kind of the philosophical underpinnings. From a medical point of view, there is contemporary medical research around oil and inflammation and some other things that I won't get into. I'll leave those sorts of questions for our physician friends. But if you were to go and check out the Forks Over Knives website or some of the other whole food plant-based physicians groups, they could certainly provide you with a laundry list of all the academic research around oil consumption and some of the potentially negative markers that it might help induce around inflammation and some other things. So that's, I think, for individuals to really kind of decide. The Forks Over Knives course, when people are going through that, we do ask you to stick to the kind of philosophy and the teaching components that the course is requiring, because the idea of learning to cook without oil becomes very, very compelling and very interesting. So the second part of your question is really about, well, how do you cook without oil? There's a few techniques. roasting without oil, what's called a dry saute, or no oil saute, which is essentially just cooking in a hot pan without any oil, but using flavorful liquid to help flash the pan to very quickly release any food that might be sticking and causing the development of caramelization and color at the bottom of that pan. So there's a handful of techniques that you'll learn about in Forks Over Knives very specifically that help, from a technique point of view, understand and unravel what that looks like. So hopefully that's really helpful to you. I'm going to go ahead now and pass it back to Chef Barton. It looks like he has a few more questions coming in.
All right. Ken, awesome. Thank you. Wow, Ken, I learned a lot from you. Thank you very much. All right, from Liz. Hi, top of the morning to you as well. Completion date is May 31st. All the content in the course remain available to me after instructional videos, etc. Yes, everything does remain to you available to you in perpetuity, except live access to the people behind it, to grading. But these live events are open to anybody to join always, and they are archived, and you can always see those. So you can always check back in and see us here. But in terms of the course content, it is always available to you. Thanks for asking. Great question. And another one for jicama. Favorite ways to prepare jicama. You know what? I actually just got a jicama the other day. I do the Misfits box, and got some jicama just the other day for the first time in a long time. It doesn't make its way up to Maine very often. We don't see it. And anyway, I love it just as sticks. I find it endlessly satisfying, just the texture of it. It's like water chestnut in that it has this incredible crunch and structure to it, but then also it just gives way, and it's soft, and it's just a wonderful texture, similar to like an Asian pear. Shredded and mixed into just about every salad that I make is a great way to use it up, because jicamas tend to be pretty big, and recipes for jicama tend not to use the whole jicama. So shredding it on a mandolin, or practicing your knife skills on it, doing a very thin slice, etc. There's just so many ways to use it. It's so versatile, but basically when I have it, I throw it in everything. And one of the ways to do it that I do that I really love in salads is I use a peeler, and once the outer skin has been taken off, I cut it into sort of sheets, maybe 2 fingers thick or so, and then use a peeler to just make very thin little ribbons of it. And in that way, you get all of that wonderful texture of it, but it also just integrates into the fork, right? I mean, you can actually just kind of stab it along with some lettuce and eat it. And it adds wonderful texture in so many ways. So there's that. There's 1,000 other ways and more to use it, but that's one of my favorites. All right. From Zarko S. Hi there, friend. If I were to grill salmon or trout, and I can only use 3 ingredients for seasoning, what would you use? Thanks in advance. Wow. Okay. Curious to know what your 3 limit is. What the who's impressing that upon you? Salt, certainly one of them. I would assume that might be sort of outside the bounds of your 3 seasonings. But I actually, you know what? I don't like to mix seasonings all that much. I would say that maybe 2 that I would mix would be fennel seeds and black pepper. Are really great, really great combination on salmon and trout, the salmonid family, the richness of it. So grind in a mortar and pestle, or as I do in my pepper grinder, I actually have a mixture of fennel seeds, black pepper, and allspice berries. That's just what I use for black pepper because I like that flavor. I also don't use, black pepper very often in things. So when I do, I really want it vibrant and beautiful and bright, and that mixture really does a nice job. But pepper and fennel. Another one that's really great with those fish is lime and dill. It's just a wonderful combination of ingredients, and the acidity of the lime juice is matched beautifully by the fattiness, the richness of both of those fish. And dill is just this unique combination with lime. It works really, really well. Another one? Yeah. Just, you know what? I'm a big fan of onion powder. It feels like I'm cheating, and it's a little bit of a hack sometimes, but I'm a really big fan of onion powder. Just a small little dab of it, a small sprinkling on it. Just, it adds this familiarity, but also a depth of flavor and complexity that I find really beguiling. Don't overuse it, because then it'll just taste like ranch dressing, and you don't want that. Just a little bit. Use it like you would cologne or perfume. Just a tiny little bit. You want it to be alluring and beguiling, not just like, cologne. So onion powder, same thing. All right, that was a lot. Hey, thanks, Darko. I appreciate your question. From Aruna, hi. Trouble managing the oil temp when I'm deep frying at home, particularly if the oil gets too hot. Oftentimes, something fries for several minutes and I can't get the temperature cooled off in those minutes. Help. So, yes, this is an issue, and something that I struggle with to some degree as well. And you know what? That's what makes frying an art form at home. When you're in a restaurant, you have this industrial thing that is perfectly aligned to maintain oil temperature within 5 degrees. And so it can sense when you just dropped 40 frozen chicken nuggets into it in a restaurant, right? Or an entire bag of frozen fries, and it compensates. At home, when you're using a pot, it's a lot harder, and it's a lot harder to manage. And then you start getting into, do you have gas? Do you have electric? Do you have induction burners? And what kind of pot are you using? And this might be one of the more important things for you to consider. If you are using a cast iron pot or something like a Staub or a Le Creuset pot, those are going to hold heat and radiate it back in. So you're going to have a lot of trouble gauging that temperature drop. Anytime you add food to your oil, the temperature is going to drop, right? Because you have 2 different temperature things. If your pan itself is holding that heat, that can both be a good thing, but also be detrimental if you're doing too much. So the thing that I would suggest is to fry in very small batches. Okay? In that way, you are not dropping the temperature of your oil as much. If you throw in a lot of something cold into hot oil, you drop the temperature a lot. If you drop just a few things in, you're not trying to manage as big of a variable. And frying is best done in small batches anyway, because you want everything to have space. It's like in the garden. You want your plants to have some space between them, right? So they can get nutrients and sun. Well, frying is the same. Nothing can touch each other. It should have enough oil to bubble around it. And quite frankly, fried food, to me, it doesn't necessarily need to be served bright spanking hot right out of the fryer. Oftentimes it benefits even from sitting a little bit to gain a little bit of texture and a little bit of opportunity for the seasoning to dry it. So that's what I would suggest is there's so many variables to discuss there, but really the takeaway that I would say is in small batches, it is an art form though. I will say, it is actually probably one of the very most difficult cooking techniques there is deep frying when you're trying to manage the oil yourself. So have courage, have faith, and know that this is not a struggle unique to you. Cheers, Arena. I appreciate you. All right, I am coming up to not a hard stop, but my little 8-month-old little baby boy is sleeping upstairs, and he's probably going to wake up at some point anytime soon. So I'm going to roll through some of these other questions and then throw it off to Ken. Be so kind to finish out. So from Elena, Chef Barton, just want to say how grateful I am. Oh, thank you so much. Loveless. Oh, that's very nice. I appreciate it. I really appreciate that you all show up to these, because otherwise we wouldn't have opportunity to do them. So will you have access to the office hours after our 90 days is up? Absolutely, you will. These events are free, they're open to the public, and they are archived. So please, we love our alumni. Please drop in, say hello, keep in touch. They're always part of the Ruby family. All right. I'm going to, let's see, Susan K. had an amazing dish at a restaurant that was butternut squash ravioli, but was vegetarian. I wanted to recreate it, but part of a plant-based dish. In order to recreate butternut squash filling, do you recommend a tofu or a nut ricotta? I'm going to say nut ricotta on this. I think either are going to be delicious. They are going to sort of serve the purpose of adding lightness, adding richness, giving a silken, beautiful sort of velvety texture. But butternut squash, one of the very best pairings with butternut squash is nuts, is that nutty flavor that it itself has to some degree, but it's really paired so beautifully, and it's all of its elegance and sort of grace is brought out when paired with nuts. So I would just say nuts just from a flavor standpoint, as well as, you know, the nutrition is great and serves the purpose. So, hey, thanks. Appreciate you. All right. From Eugene Rose. Hi there. Is it safe to use a copper pan for sauteing? Put it on high heat. Absolutely. Copper pan. They are the very best for some reasons, for sauteing. So I have copper cookware, and I'm assuming that your copper pan is lined on the inside with some other metal, whether it's stainless steel or tin or something. There's a number of different styles. I have never sauteed directly on copper, and I wouldn't necessarily. Also, I've never really seen those pans. If they are, they're for very specific purposes. So would I saute in copper pans? Absolutely. And the reason that sauteing on copper is so good is that copper conducts heat better than any other metal. And so it is the most responsive of all of the pan types to the heat. So when you add whatever it is and that pan heat drops, it will take on the heat from whatever the heat source is. And so it leads to a more even heat and just a little bit more control. And it's you know, copper is the Indy car, the Formula One race car of the cooking world in terms of just its perfection of engineering and its responsiveness. And it's fun. They're really fun to cook over. Now, there was another question about copper, I believe, from Dorothy B. a little bit further down. Do I need a stainless steel pan to practice the pan tossing? Or is it practice exercise with beans just so it doesn't, the non-stick? So not about copper specifically, but under pan. So yes, the purpose of just tossing, that is just for practice. And yeah, there's no reason to cause damage to, you know, a non-stick coating or something like that. So any pan will work. It should be light enough that you're not giving yourself tennis elbow from trying to toss with a cast iron pan, you know, something like that. But yeah, there you go. Any pan will work as long as the size and the shape are correct. All right, from Kenneth S. Back to the top there. What's a good book on sauces? Great question. So if you're looking for very classic sauces from the French canon, the Le Guide d'Escoffier is the tome of all tomes of French cuisine. It probably has about 2,000 sauces in there. Most of them are quite antiquated. You know, some of them are just from a different era and involve all sorts of ingredients that we just don't use anymore. But that's a very interesting book to understand sort of the evolution of the French canon of sauces, those mother sauces, sort of the categories into which all French sauces fall. But this day and age, and especially with plant-based cuisine, sauces are really global inspiration. So you're seeing, so many flavor combinations coming out of Africa, the Caribbean, Asian, so that French canon is no longer really perfectly relevant. One book that I really do like is James Peterson has a book called Sauces. He's written a number of very good books, but that is a great one because it gives such a great basic primer on how to think about sauces, how they're created, what makes a sauce work, whether it's a African, West African, like mafe type sauce, or whether it's a romesco or whether it's a mayonnaise, they all have the same sort of underlying personalities that you're looking to bring into balance, as well as the same sort of aspects of cuisine that you're looking to bring into tension with each other, whether it's sweet, fatty, salty, sour, bring them all together. So that's a great book on it. But also, most cookbooks these days have a section on sauces. It seems sort of par for the course these days, but also one of the most interesting chapters that I find in almost every cookbook. So, when pandemic allows, or even just online retailers sometimes allow you to look through some of the chapters. So take a look around, and if you see any that really inspire you, go. But James Peterson sauce is a great one. All right. Rosalind asks about smoked tofu. I don't know about that as relates to forks over knives. I will leave that one to Ken to answer in a few minutes when I have to roll. So I'm going to scroll down here and find some ones that I can give a good answer to, and leave those that Ken is better suited to. So from Cassidy down there, how valuable would you consider a Ruby education and a potential employee? So as a former employer, so I had 7 restaurants in the Washington, D.C. area. I had several hundred cooks and hired many more than that. What I look for on a resume is drive, is motivation. And that's the pedigree that really matters. And what's impressive to me most about Ruby, and I would have said this before I was part of the Ruby family, is that an online at-home education is driven by you. It is driven by your desire to make improvements, to expand your knowledge, to gain a foothold into a new career course. That speaks volumes. That speaks volumes right then and there. And that's about you. That has nothing to do with Ruby. That you committed yourself to it, I would give you a shot in my kitchen just because of that on your resume. That shows me a lot. So from that standpoint, yeah, it's very valuable towards getting a foot in the door. Also, from a practical standpoint, just being able to show up and be like, yeah, actually, here's the certificate. And it says I do have a legitimate understanding of cuisine and technique. Oh my gosh, thank you. What a great starting place to work from as an employer. This is great. Wow, welcome to the team. And as far as Ruby goes, speaking no nepotism here, from within the Ruby family, just from an outside observer's perspective, Ruby is very well established, very well respected. And if you look around, you have hotel companies like Marriott and Accor, Hyatt that are that rely on Ruby as part of their employee development and training program. So it speaks volumes to the quality of education that you get here. So is it valuable? Absolutely, in many ways. And thanks. Appreciate you joining. That says a lot about you that you even show up to one of these. So you've got a bright future ahead of you. Cheers. All right. From Rita M, do I freeze homegrown tomatoes from summer? You do, and it's really convenient. Yes, I do as well. I grow a lot of tomatoes. I grow a lot of tomatoes. The ones that I freeze, though, are small ones, are the cherry tomatoes. And the reason for that is that the big tomatoes, well, they have more water in them. Their structure is different, and it's not analog. I'm taking a fresh, ripe slicer tomato, like a beefsteak, and a frozen one. It's just, yes, it'll make great sauce, fine, but it's probably not a sauce tomato to begin with. So I don't freeze slicer tomatoes. Cherry tomatoes, though, are perfect because more often than not, I'm just adding them into the end of a sauteed veg dish, whatever it is. I'm throwing them into a sauce, etc., making a quick pasta sauce out of them. So frozen works beautifully. It's almost a perfect analog. The way that I freeze them is on sheet trays. And the reason for this is, it's not helpful? Is a big block, a single frozen block of many cherry tomatoes. Right? It's just not helpful. So I individually freeze them. I lay out a couple of pints on a sheet tray. I have a space in my freezer specifically reserved for this during the summer. And so then I have these beautiful frozen little marbles. They freeze faster this way, so you actually get a better quality product with less damage from the freezing process. But then also you have the ability to just say, I need 3 tomatoes, or I need 45 tomatoes. And there you go. And I store them in big gallon bags once they're frozen. So great thing to do. Yes, absolutely. Take advantage of summer's bounty. From Patrick here, I had asked him to post up this book. There was a woman asking earlier about how to make recipes for one. So Joe Yonan, the editor of the food section at the Washington Post and a good friend, has a book called Serve Yourself. It's all about cooking for one, and you can learn a lot from that book in terms of just how to strategize and think about it. So highly recommended that. From Schaefer, my husband and I always differ in what we like as far as taste. How can you find taste compromise? How can you cater to another when you don't agree on what tastes good? Oh boy. Oh boy. Depends on how far apart you are on that, I think. And there's a lot to unpack in this one. So here's what I would say. Sauces. Sauces are a really easy way to do this. I'm assuming you might both like pasta, right? Or fried rice dish, or sauteed piece of salmon, whatever it is. As I mentioned earlier, I have a lot of sauces that I have in my freezer. Romesco, we were talking about barbecue sauce, and etc. Basil walnut pesto, herb pestos, cilantro pecan pesto. I mean, you name it. I've got a lot of different sauces out there that I make, and then I freeze in like single serve little pouches. So if you're sauteing your salmon and you like cilantro pecan pesto and he likes barbecue sauce, great. There you go. You've made 2 distinct dishes with one effort. The majority of the effort being ahead of time and in bulk. So that's what I would recommend you do. In terms of if you're just that far apart, like just in terms of total cuisines, and he likes only dessert and you like only savory foods, I'm not sure where the middle ground is on that. So anyway, interesting question. Thank you so much. All right. Let's see. Chef, just finished my, this is from Daphne down there at the bottom. Just finished my Forks Over Knives course. How do I continue with Ruby plant-based cooking to have a career? Interesting. I had fun during my course. And what can I sub for seaweed? Interesting. So continuing on a career is you now have the base skill set for stepping into a kitchen, finding a mentor, taking a traditional path. One of the wonderful things about this is plant-based cuisine is now hitting mainstream. It's still certainly not the primary method of operating, cuisine in restaurants, but would you be able to find somewhere to hone your skills and to be mentored? Absolutely. I don't know where you are located, but I'm sure there's something around you. So find that, become part of that community, and find your pathways there. In terms of a sub for seaweed, I'm not sure if you're asking what can I use seaweed in place of, or what can I use in place of seaweed. So I use seaweed, and I wrote a book on seaweed, and I call them sea greens because, well, you might as well tell people how they are used as a culinary ingredient. So sea greens, they don't translate necessarily into, if you're doing a sauteed spinach dish, you wouldn't necessarily want to do a sauteed kelp dish. Just from a digestion standpoint, from a cost standpoint, from a taste standpoint, it doesn't work for me. To me, the seaweeds are best used as part of other ingredients, folded into a salad, used in place of some of the spinach, etc. But anything that needs an added boost of umami flavor, some depth and richness, add some seaweed to. Whether it's a spice rub with dried dulse or wakame, something like that in powder form used as part of a marinade, whether it's a sauté dish, a roasted vegetable dish, etc., into which fresh or frozen kelp is folded at the very end, etc. That's really how I use it, is a flavor and nutrition augmentation. I'm not shy with it, but I also don't like to overdo it. So I hope that helps. For the last question here, Denise, I need to purchase a vegetable steaming pot. I have seen many types, but not sure which type is most versatile. Do you have any recommendations? Well, no, I don't. I actually don't. I've never used a vegetable steaming pot. And my recommendations there would be to look through the recommendations or the comments on the, I encourage you to use local retailers and to shop local and shop small, but Amazon and other online retailers are a good place to find curated information about a product. And there's a lot of consumer wisdom that you can find there. So I'm sorry that I don't have a specific answer for you. I will say, though, that all Breville appliances that I've ever owned and worked with, I've always found to be top level. I don't even know if they make a vegetable steamer, but I can recommend basically everything else that I've tried from them. So check them out. All right, and so with that, I will sign off. Ken, thank you so much for joining and being my backup and support on this. And to each and all of you, thank you so much for joining me, allowing me to be part of your day, part of your learning. I learned so much from you. I appreciate you. Cooking and feeding people is an act of love, and I love you because we're all part of the Happy Ruby family. So thanks for coming. Ken, see ya. All of you else.
Thank you much, Barton. That just makes me so happy to know that you're about to go see your son, and otherwise had a great time with some of our students today on this live event. So we're going to go through, and just for the sake of time, go through fairly quickly, just a handful more questions that we have here. One from Rosalind about smoked tofu. Is there a recipe on the plant-based forks over knives course that talks about, or there is a recipe that talks about smoked tofu? Do you have a recipe for this or brand that comes to mind? I believe this is in one of the penne carbonara dishes, maybe, where there's a small amount of smoked tofu. If you're having a hard time sourcing that, you can omit that from the dish. It does add a nice small amount of texture and some smoky flavor. There's a local brand. I'm in Oregon on the West Coast. There's a brand called Wildwood that makes a pretty good smoked tofu, just in a small, maybe 5 or 6 ounce pack. I could recommend that. Otherwise, it's a fairly easy product to make yourself. Set up a small, if you have a home grill or anything like that, you can set up just a small smoker kind of situation and smoke some vegetables, smoke some tofu, some red peppers. Great way to add lots of flavor. Joanna has a question here. She says, I have a hard time equating whole wheat pasta with a whole foods diet. Also, with all the whole grains mentioned, I've not heard anything about barley, nor have I seen any recipes. So, it really just depends on you and your own personal preferences. Certainly, a whole wheat pasta would be in a plant-based diet. Depending on the type of whole wheat, maybe you classify it as a whole food plant-based or not. Not all whole wheat is actually made up of the entire proportionality of the bran and the germ and the endosperm and all these things that make up the wheat itself. Sometimes they just add a small amount back in, not really the whole grain. So I could see any hesitation there kind of stemming from that. But yeah, absolutely, a lot of people find ways to add whole wheat products into their whole food plant-based diet. Rose has a question here. How would you suggest meeting children's caloric needs on a predominantly vegan diet, specifically child athletes? Would you introduce oils? Rose, I would suggest that if you have a child in your household who's very athletic and looking at kind of athletic performance, certainly would make sense if you have any consideration around getting enough calories or just kind of meeting the overall nutritional needs for that person. Do seek out the guidance and support of a health professional. If you were to speak with a physician or another a different qualified healthcare professional, they may be able to give you some guidance specifically on consumption and calories and some of the things around high caloric foods that might be beneficial. For me, I always go to nuts and seeds and those higher caloric foods, avocados, versus going to an oil, again, because those other foods that I mentioned actually have lots of other nutrients to contribute versus oil just contributing that fat. So hopefully that's helpful for you. Next question here from Terry Lynn. I'm finding that beans and grains a bit too much for my system. What has happened is my veggie consumption drops the more beans and grains I add to my diet. Any suggestions? Gosh, it's just about finding the right balance, right? So for me, I really love legumes. I'm always talking about lentils and making different beans every week. I did a dinner with some friends on Sunday night and had amazing Corona beans simmered with saffron, and we had red lentils. We had yellow split peas. So I can eat beans lots of different ways. For me, it's really all about finding ways to incorporate the vegetables that you like, even with those beans. So doing a really veggie heavy chili that might be 2 or 3 beans, but also lots of chopped onions and tomatoes, mushrooms, even putting things in there like sweet potatoes and some other things, finishing it with a ton of greens on the top. That's a great trick on any soup or stew. Finding that right balance. So hopefully if you're feeling just too overly full because of beans and things, have a salad, have some raw veggies. That should all be good. But I don't want to in any way dissuade you from keeping that high level of bean and grain consumption where you need it. Last question here from Gerardo. Hello, are whole wheat recipes part of the plant-based professional course? Yes, they are. The plant-based professional course is a little different than Forks Over Knives in that we take a more open view about plant-based. It's not specific to whole food plant-based within our pro course because it's teaching you really how to prepare foods within the entire spectrum of plant-based cooking, which includes some comfort foods and some other foods that include oil and some of those more refined foods. So that would absolutely be included within that course, despite some of the other limitations that Forks Over Knives or other courses might place on some of those foods. So it looks like all the questions that we had today. Really amazing that we had that time with Chef Barton. Also really feel really good that I was able to come in and also provide some support as well. So great to see all of you. And until next time, we look forward to seeing you in class, and happy cooking. Take care.